Imperial long-range sensors detected the object before anyone believed it was real. It drifted into the outer control corridor slowly, without stealth, without escort, without the precise formation patterns every recognized power used when entering contested space. At first glance, it looked like debris, too large to be natural, too irregular to be military. The system flagged it as an anomaly and forwarded the data up the chain, where analysts stared at the projection in growing irritation. The vessel was wrong. Not damaged, just wrong. Its structure lacked symmetry. Plates overlapped at strange angles. External modules jutted outward as if added over time rather than designed as a whole. No aesthetic logic governed its shape. Imperial ships were clean, optimized, and elegant, each curve calculated for efficiency and intimidation. This thing looked like it had been assembled by necessity, not pride. Spectral scans returned no active weapons. Power readings fluctuated unpredictably, spiking and dropping in patterns that didn't align with any known reactor theory. Shield signatures were present but layered, redundant beyond reason. The more the sensors probed, the less coherent the results became. A junior officer finally voiced the question no one wanted to ask. Could it be human? The bridge erupted in low amusement. Humanity was a solved problem. A marginal species catalogued centuries earlier, durable, yes, but technologically inelegant. Their ships were known for inefficiency, for wasting mass on backup systems instead of refinement. They survived, but they did not dominate. They were builders, traders, explorers. Not threats. When the identification algorithms confirmed human manufacture, confidence returned instantly. A relic then? A civilian platform. Possibly a derelict that had wandered off course. An embarrassment, but not a danger. Imperial Command ordered a standard containment formation. 8 border warships fanned out, weapons powered but unfocused. Protocol demanded caution, even with inferior species. A formal transmission was prepared, language precise, authoritative, unquestionable. The message declared the region restricted and ordered the vessel to halt and submit to inspection. No response came. The object continued drifting forward, adjusting course slightly to avoid a gravity eddy, as if aware of its surroundings but unconcerned by the fleet blocking its path. Internal Empire chatter shifted from amusement to annoyance. Ignoring an Imperial directive was not acceptable, regardless of origin. Analysts re-examined the ship's structure. What they first dismissed as crude design now appeared layered, dense, overlapping hull segments built to absorb impact. Internal compartments were isolated from one another, sealed behind bulkheads thicker than most military armor. Redundancy wasn't a feature, it was the foundation. Still, doctrine prevailed. The Empire did not negotiate with unresponsive trespassers. A warning strike would be sufficient, controlled, minimal, symbolic. Enough force to demonstrate authority without risking unnecessary escalation. Weapons were calibrated to a fraction of standard output. The shot would vaporize most civilian hulls, breach anything short of a cruiser. There was no risk. The order was given. Energy lanced across the void and struck the vessel's outer plating. Sensors flared as the impact bloomed into a brilliant flash. For a fraction of a second, the bridge registered what it expected: thermal overload, structural failure, cascading breaches. Then the readings stabilized. The light faded. The vessel remained. Scorch marks spread across the hull, darkening a few external layers, but the structure beneath held. No pressure loss. No internal explosions. Power levels dipped briefly, then rerouted, climbing back to previous levels with unsettling smoothness. Silence followed. Imperial officers stared at the displays, recalibrating instruments, suspecting malfunction. A second scan confirmed the impossible. The ship had absorbed the strike as if it were environmental stress, not an attack. Murmurs spread through the command deck. That level of survivability exceeded military standards. It didn't fit any civilian classification the Empire recognized. Moments later, a transmission arrived. Not encrypted. Not formal. Not defensive. The signal was confused. The voice identified itself as human, tone steady and unhurried. The speaker asked, politely, if there had been an error. They stated they were conducting a long-range civilian exploration mission and were unsure why they had been fired upon. There was no accusation, no threat, only mild concern about hull surface damage and sensor interference. The bridge went silent. Imperial Command demanded clarification, now sharply, identifying the vessel as a warship masquerading as civilian. The human response came quickly, carrying a note of genuine puzzlement. They reiterated that the ship was not military. It was rated for extreme conditions, yes, but those were standard requirements. Deep space operations were unpredictable. Failure was expected. Survival was mandatory. As the transmission ended, analysts stared at the data again, this time without dismissal. What they saw unsettled them more than the impact ever could. If this was how humans built something meant never to fight, what did they build when they intended to go to war? Imperial Command rejected the explanation immediately. Civilian or not, nothing endured an Imperial warning strike without consequence. The fleet tightened its formation, weapons shifting from cautionary output to suppression protocols. Officers spoke in clipped tones, irritation hardening into resolve. The Empire had been patient. Now it would be obeyed. A second transmission was sent, stripped of courtesy. The vessel was ordered to power down all systems, prepare for boarding, and accept seizure under Imperial security law. The message carried the full weight of doctrine, ancient authority, unquestioned dominance. The human reply came faster this time. There was concern in the voice, but still no fear. The speaker explained that powering down was not possible while operating beyond charted space. Life support, structural integrity, radiation shielding, and navigation were all interdependent. Shutting one system down risked cascading failure. They requested safe passage instead and offered to alter course to avoid further misunderstanding. The bridge absorbed the words in stunned silence. The idea that a ship could not selectively disable systems was absurd by Imperial standards. Their vessels were designed with strict hierarchy: combat first, survival second, efficiency always. Humans, apparently, reversed the order entirely. Command authorization came through moments later. Engagement approved. Full spectrum suppression fire. The border fleet unleashed its weapons. Energy beams, kinetic strikes, shield disruptors, an overwhelming display meant to cripple, not annihilate. The void lit with controlled violence, every shot calculated to disable propulsion, shatter hull layers, and force surrender. The human vessel endured it all. External plating fractured in places, shedding scorched material into space. Beneath it, new layers absorbed the impact. Internal compartments sealed automatically, rerouting atmosphere and power without visible disruption. Sections that went dark reappeared seconds later as backup systems took over. Not one system failure propagated beyond its immediate zone. On board, Imperial sensors struggled to keep up. Damage estimates fluctuated wildly, unable to classify what they were seeing. The ship was not resisting, it was compensating. A new human transmission cut through the chaos. This time, there was urgency. Not anger. Not threats. Worry. The speaker explained they were initiating emergency safety protocols in response to sustained environmental hazards. They requested the Empire cease fire immediately to prevent escalation. There was a pause, then an almost apologetic addition: some of the ship's automated countermeasures might activate if the stress levels continued. Imperial Command barely had time to process the warning. Localized gravity distortions rippled outward from the human vessel, not weapons, but stabilization fields reacting to repeated impacts. Several Imperial ships lurched as their formations destabilized. Navigation systems compensated just in time to prevent collision. Point defense arrays on the human ship activated next, not targeting Imperial vessels directly but intercepting incoming fire with blunt efficiency. Projectiles vanished. Energy beams dispersed against adaptive shielding that shifted frequency faster than Imperial systems could retune. This wasn't combat doctrine. It was disaster management. Analysts finally reached the conclusion none of them wanted to voice. The ship was doing exactly what it was designed to do: survive catastrophic conditions long enough for its crew to make it home. The Empire's finest weapons were simply another variable to account for. A senior strategist whispered the question aloud. "If this is civilian grade, what does military grade look like?" No one answered. The human vessel transmitted again, more firmly now. They stated that continued interference posed a risk not only to themselves but to surrounding traffic lanes. They reiterated their intent to leave peacefully. They also noted, almost as an aside, that their ship's insurance policy required them to document hostile encounters accurately. The implication landed harder than any weapon. Imperial Command hesitated. Every additional second of engagement exposed the limits of their doctrine. Victory was no longer assured. Worse, withdrawal now meant acknowledging that a lone human ship, unarmed by its own definition, had forced an Imperial border fleet to stand down. Weapons powered down one by one. The void grew quiet. The human ship adjusted its trajectory smoothly, thrusters firing in controlled bursts as it aligned for departure. Before cutting the channel, the human voice returned one last time. Gratitude was expressed for the Empire's eventual cooperation. Apologies were offered for any inconvenience caused. A hope was voiced that future encounters might be less stressful for all involved. The transmission ended. Imperial ships remained motionless as the vessel drifted away, its battered exterior still more intact than any analyst thought possible. Data streams continued to pour in long after it was gone, each one reinforcing the same conclusion. The Empire had not just misjudged a ship. It had misunderstood an entire species. The border fleet did not pursue. No order was given, and none was needed. Imperial doctrine had no response for a situation where overwhelming force failed without resistance. The human vessel's retreat should have restored authority, yet the silence it left behind felt heavier than defeat. Command demanded immediate analysis. Every sensor log, every weapons readout, every millisecond of engagement data was fed into strategic cores across the Empire. The results were consistent and deeply unsettling. The human ship had never optimized for combat efficiency. It had optimized for continuity. Damage tolerance exceeded military standards by margins previously considered wasteful. System isolation prevented cascading failure entirely. Redundancy layers stacked not twice or three times, but dozens deep. Imperial engineers struggled to categorize the design philosophy. Where Empire ships focused on preventing hits, the human vessel assumed hits were inevitable. Where Empire systems prioritized peak performance, human systems prioritized function under degradation. It was not built to win battles. It was built to endure them. Worse, the engagement revealed something far more dangerous than armor or shielding. The human ship had never escalated. At no point did it threaten retaliation. Its countermeasures were reactive, automatic, and fundamentally defensive. The Empire had unleashed its strength, and humanity had responded with indifference. Strategists realized the implication almost simultaneously. A civilization that designs civilian vessels to survive sustained military assault does not fear war. It plans for it as an environmental condition. Emergency councils convened across multiple sectors. Human classification was revised mid-session. Archived reports were pulled from centuries past, dismissed encounters, unexplained survivals, inexplicable persistence in hostile regions. Patterns emerged that had been ignored because they contradicted established belief. Humanity had never tried to outshine galactic powers. They had simply outlasted everything thrown at them. An intelligence liaison raised the question that froze the chamber. If a lone exploration ship carried such resilience, then cargo haulers, colony transports, and medical vessels would share similar standards. That meant human logistics alone could operate inside battle zones indefinitely. Supply lines would not collapse. Evacuation ships would not break. Civilian loss thresholds, the cornerstone of imperial deterrence, would be meaningless. The Empire had built its dominance on controlled escalation. Humans had built their civilization on assuming control would fail. Reports continued to arrive from the border region. The human vessel had resumed its mission immediately after departure. No distress signals. No repair requests. Hull damage logged as cosmetic. The crew had noted the encounter as a hostile anomaly and adjusted future route calculations accordingly. That detail spread quietly through command ranks. Humans did not see the Empire as an enemy. Not yet. It was simply another hazard to account for, like radiation storms or unstable stars. Fear took root where pride once ruled. New directives were issued under emergency authority. All Imperial patrols were ordered to avoid provocation of human vessels of any classification. Engagement protocols were rewritten overnight. First contact doctrine was expanded retroactively. Analysts were instructed to assume that any human design concealed capabilities beyond Empire comprehension. Privately, strategists admitted the truth. If war ever came, it would not be decided by who struck first or hardest. It would be decided by who remained operational after everything went wrong. Humanity, it seemed, had already answered that question. The final report summarized the encounter in careful, neutral language. No defeat was recorded. No victory claimed. Yet the closing assessment carried a warning rarely seen in Imperial documentation. The Empire had encountered a civilization that did not separate survival from infrastructure, or civilian life from strategic endurance. Humanity did not build warships to dominate others. They built everything to function when dominance failed. The border incident faded from public record, classified and sealed. But among those who had witnessed it, the conclusion lingered, unspoken yet undeniable. The most terrifying thing about the human vessel was not that it could withstand an empire's firepower. It was that it never needed to fight back. The official response was silence. No public statement, no broadcast of victory or warning, no acknowledgement that the encounter had ever occurred. For an empire that measured power through spectacle, the absence of narrative was itself an admission of uncertainty. Records were sealed, sensor data locked behind clearance tiers few possessed, and the border commanders involved were reassigned without explanation. Internally, the consequences spread fast. Revised threat models rippled through Imperial strategic networks. Humanity was no longer listed as a developing civilization or a secondary power. They were reclassified under a new designation, an adaptive endurance species. The category came with a single directive: avoid unnecessary engagement. Trade analysts began uncovering uncomfortable correlations. Human freight routes cut through regions others avoided. Their medical ships operated inside radiation zones declared permanently lethal by Imperial science. Colony transports survived events that should have erased them from records. None of it had been aggression. It was preparation. A civilian civilization that planned for catastrophe as a baseline condition did not fear escalation. It rendered escalation irrelevant. Border patrol behavior changed subtly but permanently. When human transponders appeared, Imperial ships adjusted course. Inspection demands softened into advisories. Warnings became requests. No one wanted to be the next commander whose weapons proved meaningless. Quietly, new construction standards were proposed within the Empire. Additional redundancy. Thicker internal bulkheads. Decentralized systems. Each suggestion was met with resistance, cost, inefficiency, loss of elegance. Yet the data from the encounter refused to be dismissed. Survival, it turned out, was not inefficient. It was decisive. The human exploration vessel continued its mission, unaware of the doctrine it had shattered. Its crew filed reports, logged repairs, and moved on. To them, the encounter was a cautionary note about territorial boundaries and communication protocols. They did not consider it a victory. They barely considered it remarkable. That indifference haunted Imperial planners more than any threat display could have. The Empire had always believed warships defined a civilization's strength. Humanity proved something far more unsettling. Strength could be embedded everywhere, distributed across cargo holds, passenger decks, and exploration frames. Power did not need to announce itself if it was always present. Years later, when new human ships began appearing across known space, the Empire watched carefully. They were still asymmetrical. Still inelegant. Still overbuilt beyond reason. None of them carried visible weapons worth noting. And none of them needed to. The Empire never learned what a true human warship looked like. Not because humanity hid them, but because they never had to show them. The lesson had already been delivered by something never meant to fight. In the end, the most enduring change was not written into law or doctrine. It was psychological. The Empire had encountered a species that treated survival as a given, not a victory condition. From that day forward, whenever an Imperial officer asked the same question, "That can't be human, a warship," the answer came unspoken but absolute. No. That was just how humans built everything.